In this episode, we're going to be talking about boots, EDC kit, preparing your kit for outings, bushcraft during the hunting season, alternative bow drill positions, and powerless refrigeration. Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Ask Paul Kirtley. At the moment I'm in Scotland. I've been working here for the past few weeks doing various things, including our River Spey canoe trips, and hopefully you've seen some of the video of that adventure on my YouTube channel and on my blog already. I've been up to a few other things, and I'll have a few announcements and a few other blog and video bits and pieces that will come out of what I've been doing up here, so keep an eye out for those going forwards. But I'm just taking this opportunity, I'm right at the end of this block of working up here, taking the opportunity to catch up on a few Ask Paul Kirtley questions and get those out to you. Again, I'm falling behind with the emails, so I'm going to crack through some emails on this episode, and let's start with the first one without further ado. This one is from David Guy, and David asks, what type of boots would you recommend for the UK? I use a pair of Mindel walking boots, but I'm conscious I could be using more appropriate type of footwear, patrol boots, etc. Any guidance would be greatly appreciated. Cheers, David. Well, good to hear from you, David. Hope you're doing well. It's a very broad question, and if you walk into an outdoor store in the UK or further afield, you're going to be confronted with a whole range of different walking boots. And that's not to mention more specialist stores where you might get military boots, you might get trail running shoes, all of those sorts of things. There's lots of different types of footwear you can wear for the outdoors. Going back to some of my previous questions and answers about bushcraft, there is certainly no specific footwear for bushcraft, and I think ultimately you have to wear what's appropriate for the terrain, the season, the conditions that you're going to be encountering, and you also need to wear boots that are comfortable. Some manufacturers make boots that are a bit wider, some make them a bit narrower. They have a typical last, or often last being the mold that the shape that the boot is made on and formed from. Some are thinner than others. Some people have got quite broad flat feet, other people have got long narrow feet, some people have got higher arches than others. So to a certain extent you kind of have to find a brand that works for you. But that said, there are clearly some quality brands out there. Mindel, you've already mentioned. Scarpa make very good walking boots. Zamberlan make good walking boots. Lower make good walking boots. Brasher make good lighter weight walking boots. Garmont make good mountain boots and walking boots. And forgive me if I've forgotten any others. Lundhag make good boots as well. So there are a range of high quality boots out there. Altberg is a British manufacturer, which is well worth looking at. And I think you have to experiment to a certain extent. Certainly try boots on and work from what you've already tried. But as a general point, I would say your personal foot shape aside, and some manufacturers like Altberg, for example, can make boots that will fit your particular foot, and that's certainly worth looking into. If you have a somewhat unusual foot shape, or a foot shape that doesn't get on with some of the mainstream brands, certainly seek out a manufacturer that can do something a little bit more custom for you. But generally, think about what you're going to be doing. Does the boot need to be really hard wearing? Does it need to be more resistant to, say, fire? Or does it need to be super lightweight? Does it need to be really water resistant? Does it need to be able to dry quickly? do you want a high leg boot or a lower leg boot? Or do you even just want a trail running shoe or an approach shoe? It depends what you're doing. I think a leather hiking boot is a good general boot. The reason I'm scratching here a little bit is there are still some midges around. Even though I'm recording this towards the end of October, it's been very warm, it's mild, and there are still some midges around. We need more frost here to get rid of them. There's more midges here than there were mosquitoes in Canada last month. So it was warm there, it's warm here. It seems to be right in the northern hemisphere, right across from North America to certainly to Scotland. We've had warmer weather for this time of year. So if you see me scratching around, it's because there's midges coming for me. But generally, yeah, a leather walking boot is a good place to start. Mind will make very good ones. If you're happy with those boots, if you find them comfortable, if they keep your feet warm and dry in the conditions that you're out, I would say they're fine. Generally, I quite like a high leg boot, particularly in the woods. Not because I would sort of want to emulate some sort of stormtrooper look or para boot look. It's simply because this is a great example of where I am at the moment. And if you're listening to this on a podcast, I'm sat in the middle of a mixed Scots pine, birchwood forest. There's some aspen in here as well. And underground, it's quite tussocky. There's lots of heather. There's bilberries, there's cowberries, there's sphagnum moss, there's some damp spots, there's streams to cross, there's boggy sections in the low-lying areas, there's logs like the one I'm sitting on to step over, and I like to have a boot that doesn't leave a gap between my trousers and the top of the boot, so that I have an elasticated bottom on my trousers. I'm wearing Fjallraven trousers at the moment, but I've got some Lundhag trousers that I like to hike in as well that I can seal over my boots, and typically that then stops me getting bits like pine needles, bits of heather, which are notorious for getting stuck in your socks, and other stuff, other bits and pieces of the forest in the top of my boot. We had a previous question about trouser twists many episodes ago. I can't remember which one. It was one of the earlier episodes. It's a good idea to try and seal your trousers as long as you're not going to get too hot and sweaty. Some exceptions are in the summer when you might want to be wearing shorts, and also you want to think about ticks. There's lots of red deer in this area. There are some ticks around as well, so having that seal is good, and having a higher leg boot helps do that. I've got some nice Zamberlan walking boots that I've had for years, but they're a little bit low, and I get a bit irritated with them because even with the trousers with a little hook on that I can hook into the laces, they tend to ride up, particularly if I'm stepping up rock steps in the hills or stepping over logs in the woods. So I don't wear them as much as I would like. You know, I bought them, but I don't wear them as much as I would like to, simply because I find I have a gap between my trousers and the boot. So I like something a bit higher. So I like lower military boots. They're the boots that I wear quite a lot for working, and they're quite good around fires. They're good in mud. You can keep them in mud for a long time. You can clean them up every day. They're pretty resilient from that perspective. Here I've got some Lundhag boots on. They're professional high, I think they are. They're not so waterproof as you might think, but combined with a sealskin sock and a merino inner, they're super comfortable. I've been wading through streams that are, you know, about this deep, about 45 centimeters deep. I haven't been getting water over the top of my boots. I haven't been getting wet feet. Inside of the boot gets a bit wet, but you can take the membrane out, which is the sock, and you can get the boots to dry quite quickly. You can get the socks to dry quite quickly. The inner merino is very comfortable. You don't get any abrasion between the sealskin sock and the foot, even on longer hikes, because you get the socks moving against each other. So that's a very comfortable combination I like for wet woodlands. I wear them in northern Sweden in the autumn, Scotland in the autumn. I've been stalking recently with a friend of mine, and we've been traipsing around very damp woodland looking for deer. These boots are very good for that as well. So I generally like a higher leg boot. In the mountains, I like to have a boot that's got quite a soft sole. Maybe a bit softer than normal. Some of the Vibram soles can be a little bit hard, and on wet rock then it can be quite slippery. So if you're going into the hills a lot, I would try and seek out something with quite a softer sole. So I've got some winter boots by Scarpa that will take a crampon. They've got quite a soft rubber sole on them, and I've got some Garmont boots which are much lighter weight. They're almost like a rock shoe with an ankle cuff on, if you like. They're that kind of design. They're really quite light. They're a fabric boot, fabric and suede. They do have a membrane in them which makes them a bit sweaty, but they're light and they've got a very grippy sole. So I would think about exactly what you want to do. If you're going for specific things, go for a specialist boot that really suits those conditions. If you want a general boot, I would say a 3 to 4 season leather hiking boot with a reasonably high leg will suit you in the forest, in the hills, if you want a one-stop shop. The question then is whether or not you buy a boot with a membrane in. Personally, I'm moving towards not having membranes, because I find if I look after the leather lasts a lot longer than the membranes do. The membranes start to break down, and by membrane I'm talking about a Gore-Tex or similar liner in the boot. That tends to break down where it's folded repeatedly. It starts to leak there anyway, and also they can be quite sweaty on hot days. Whereas if you buy an unlined boot that's just a leather boot, then you can choose what socks to wear with that boot. You can, if your sealskin or similar membrane socks wear out, you can put new ones in, and the leather boots will last a lot longer. Meindl are renowned for lasting a long time, for example. I know people who've worn Meindl boots for a decade, and they've worn them a lot and they last a long time. So that's a long-winded answer, but I would say general leather boot, reasonably high leg, that'll serve you in the mountains, in the woods. Try and get one. My personal recommendation would be try and get one without a membrane, and then choose the socks combination which suit the conditions and the season that you're going for. You might still then need to go for a specialist winter boot if you're going into the mountains, or you're going into the far northern forest because it's cold, or because you need to put crampons on. But other than that, I think that will serve you very well. So it sounds to me like the ones you've already got may well suit you in lots of different conditions, but if they're uncomfortable, maybe have a chat with somebody like Altberg to see if they can make you a boot that's really well fitted to your foot. They're a UK manufacturer based in North Yorkshire, and they've got a very, very good reputation, and they're not particularly heavy for leather boots either. So without further ado, let's have a look at the next question. Thank you, David. Anyway, next one from Paul Bonner. And he says, thanks for the opportunity to tap into your expertise. I was wondering if you bother with an EDC bag, an everyday carry bag. If so, what does your kit consist of? Thanks, Paul in Canada. Well, I don't have an everyday carry bag as such, certainly not in the sort of prepping sense, but I am outdoors a lot. And when I'm outdoors, there is a core set of kit that I typically have with me. You can find some things on my blog, and I'll put a link in the show notes. And remember, the show notes are on my blog, paulkirtley.co.uk. There'll be a link, if you're watching this on YouTube, there'll be a link to my blog where you can find all of these episodes, all the other information that I put out, and the show notes to these shows as well. I'll put a link to some of the articles I've already written, so I'm not covering the same old ground that I've already covered. But for example, there's a 7 items I never leave home without article, which basically are items that I always consider having with me, and pretty much always do have with me, especially in a woodland, a forest environment. I will have those with me. In a bush environment in Africa or Australia, that's typically the sort of stuff that I will have with me. In the mountains, it might be a little bit different, or different versions of those things that are better suited to the weight to utility ratio that is justifiable for an above the tree line trip, or a trip where you're above the tree line a lot. But those are the considerations you have to have a look at, and also have a look at my lightening the load series of videos for some ideas on making sure you've still got the utility that you need from really important items, but maybe reducing the weight of what you carry, particularly if you're heading up some steep hills and into the mountains, whether they're forested mountains or whether you're going above the tree line and dipping down into valleys and back into the hills. It's good to have those things with you still. From a day-to-day perspective, I'll typically have some sort of cutting tool on me, whether that's a folding pocket knife, a Swiss Army knife, or a Leatherman. And that's just generally around and about, because I'm typically doing things that have some relation to my work. I may be fixing equipment, I may be opening boxes of new equipment that's arrived for the company, for Frontier Bushcraft, or for our online store. Any sort of small cutting tool that I can cut boxes with, cut paracord, cut string, I find that invaluable. I find myself feeling completely naked without at least a pocket knife on me. So I've got a pocket knife at all times, or at least something with a reasonable blade on it. Clearly you've got to stick within the law, depending on where you are and what you should be carrying with you. But I do that. So whether it's a non-locking folding blade, or whether it's a lock blade, or whether it's a belt knife, I've always got a blade on me of some description, because that's a key tool. I've typically got some sort of illumination on me, a small torch, whether it's a head torch or a keyring torch or something with me. I find that absolutely invaluable as well. I've normally got a whistle on me. I've normally got some means of lighting a fire, and on my keyring I have a means of creating sparks, whether that's for lighting gas stoves or whether it's for lighting fires. Again, I can't see why you wouldn't have something like that with you. I typically have a small pocket first aid kit with me, and those are the sorts of things that I have with me because I'm using those all the time. It's not something I've got squirreled away just in case. I'm using cutting tools, I'm using, I need a torch, and I need to light fires or light stoves on a daily basis, and having a first aid kit sensible, including some headache tablets and what have you. I also have some spare contact lenses because I wear contact lenses, so I typically have some spare contact lenses with me, and that's what I'm going to have with me all the time, wherever I am. And then, you know, if I'm going further off the beaten track, I'm going to choose my equipment appropriately for where I'm going, as per, you know, all the different articles on my blog and videos on my blog and my YouTube channel. So for specific environments, you can go into more detail with each of those, but generally that's what I'm going to have with me. So thanks for the question, Paul. So next question is from Frank, and apologies if I get your name wrong, Frank. I think it's Frank de Weijer, W-E-I-J-E-R, and his question is quite a long question, so I'll sort of summarize the main question. Is what he wants to know is what kind of preparations you make before you are going to make a trip in the woods. I, for myself, keep 2 rucksacks all packed but without food or drink ready standing on the attic. He's got one for summer conditions, he's got some basic kit in the car, he goes into quite a lot of detail, and he said generally he would like some advice on how to pack things, little tricks and advice, and keep up the good work. Thanks, Frank. So I think the main question is, how do I keep my kit ready for the outdoors? Have a look on my blog and my YouTube channel. You may have already seen various different things there, but about packing, what I pack, what I put in a day pack, or what you can put in a day pack in the woods, how to pack general bushcraft style camping equipment, and how to pack that. There's videos and articles on that, and also some basic kit, as I referred to in the previous question. Also, I think it was either the last episode or the episode before, somebody asked me about how I store my kit, and that should give you some idea as to how I keep my kit. My kit is in use a lot of the time, particularly my sort of basic core kit is in use most of the time, most of the year, and then from the end of the winter through to quite a way into the autumn, I've got a fairly standard kit that's used a lot. I'm out doing my own trips, I'm out doing trips with customers, I'm out running courses, so I'm more static, but I'm still camping in the woods. I spend a very high proportion of the year sleeping outdoors and living outdoors, so my equipment's in use a lot of the time. And so when I get home, it's typically the routine really is to get it cleaned up, get things sharpened, get things polished, get things washed and reproofed and those sorts of things, and get things right back up to a high standard. I try and, you know, keep everything in a good level of maintenance in the field, keeping boots clean and polished and well oiled, oiled, keeping sheaths well oiled, keeping knives and axes sharp and all those sorts of things. But clearly you can give them a bit more TLC. You've got more tools and materials available at home or in a workshop than you have when you're out in the field. So I try and bring everything back up to scratch when I'm at home, but that's often quite a quick turnaround. And then yes, I do put some things straight back into my rucksack, but things like my sleeping bags and things that need airing and things that are better stored in a larger way rather than compressed, I leave them open. We talked about sleeping bags in a previous episode. I don't like to keep all those things compressed, ready to go, because it doesn't do them any good. And then in terms of equipment that I maybe don't use so often, like winter kit, I keep that stored in plastic storage boxes, well aired, relatively constant temperature, so things are not going to go moldy, things are not going to get dusty, they're not going to get moths in them or any other issues that you might have with storing things over a long period of time. Have a look at the previous couple of episodes for some advice on that. And then the other thing I do, which helps me get ready for trips, is I have a set of drawers which I have kit that I always take. So going back to the previous question, things that I'm always going to take with me, with pretty much no exception, I have in a drawer, so I can just open that drawer and grab those things. So if they're not already packed in a rucksack, they'll be in that drawer and they'll be nowhere else. So I always know where they are and I can always check that I've got them. And then there are things that I often take with me but don't always take with me are in the next drawer down. And then I have other things in that stack of drawers as well. So different cutting tools perhaps for different circumstances. Again, going back to that previous question, is it a Swiss Army knife? Is it a folding lock knife? Is it a folding knife that doesn't lock? Sheath knives, saws, those sorts of things stored there. I have some first aid supplies and some other bits and pieces that I can grab and replenish my kit. So it's all easily accessible and ready to go from there. And then I've got a wardrobe with outdoor clothing in that I can grab, whether it's for the woods, whether it's for the mountains, or a combination, and canoeing equipment and that sort of thing is all easily accessible. So I don't have everything packed ready to go because it depends what I'm doing, but typically everything during the summer months, spring, summer and autumn, comes home, gets cleaned, gets put back ready to go again because I'm going again pretty soon. So hopefully that answers your question, Frank. Thanks for the question. Next one. So this is a question from Danny Barrett. Good to hear from you, Danny. Another question from Danny. He asks, could you tell me, is there a more comfortable way of using the bow drill? As being disabled, I find the posture I take very uncomfortable. Thanks, Danny. That's a really good question, and one that doesn't really get addressed as often as it should. And yeah, it can be really uncomfortable. The standard bow drill position where you're kneeling and bowing and putting pressure on can be uncomfortable for a number of reasons. People with knee problems find it uncomfortable as well. People with some back problems find it uncomfortable. People who have a bit of a belly on them find it uncomfortable to hunch over that way. Let's just be frank about this. So yeah, on your own, there aren't many different options. I've seen a few people adopt a method where they're bowing more across themselves because they have shoulder problems. I saw one guy who managed to sort of kneel on a hearthboard and bow across himself, but that took some time to develop. So I don't know specifically what it is that's uncomfortable for you, Danny, whether it's just that leg up, knee down position, that could be, and hunching over, it could be unstable and uncomfortable. You could try just kneeling and bowing across, but you don't get the strength from your shoulder. That's the issue. If you're working with other people, and let's be frank, Danny, and anybody else that's listening, we teach people to do bow drill on their own, but unless you're stranded a long way away on your own, you're never going to have to use it on your own. So think about the likelihood of that happening. You know, people get very, very focused. I must learn bow drill on my own. And it's a nice thing to be able to do. It's like, you know, being able to do a backflip off a table is a fun thing to be able to do, but it's not something that everybody needs to be able to do. And The question is, do you need to be able to do that, or are you likely to be with somebody else? And if so, maybe practice with somebody else. You know, if you look at some of the sets that are in museums from native peoples having used bow drill sets, one of the other methods, as well as having a bow, one of the other methods was to have a thong, a rawhide thong that went around with a toggle on each end, and that absolutely requires two people, because one person would use the thong like this, but then somebody else would be pushing down, and that person would be pulling against it. So that would be a two-person way of doing it. At least two, maybe even three could be doing it that way. Similarly, if you're using a bow, if you find it difficult, get somebody else to assume that position. You know what that position is, get them in that position, and then you reinforce it. You can press down, or you can bow, or you can do both, but you don't necessarily need to be kneeling in that same position. You could even do that as three people, one person pressing down and one person on each end of the bow. So there are different methods of doing it, and realistically, unless you're out in the middle of nowhere on your own and you get stranded, you're never going to have to do that on your own. So if you're going to be out with friends and you're going to choose to use it, maybe choose to practice with them and do it as a group, and that's a perfectly feasible way of doing it. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. And also, if you do feel that it's something that you find difficult to do, and you may have to do it under some circumstances, then you know, it's the same for somebody who doesn't have a lot of strength, or doesn't have a lot of ability with bow drill. Make sure you've got some other means of lighting fire on you, because that may save your life. You know, if we're talking about extreme circumstances, make sure that you have a ferro rod and something to drop sparks onto in your pocket, or make sure you have a lighter and matches and a ferro rod, so that yes, you can do bow drill potentially, but equally, let's not be romantic about it. If you really, really need a fire, there are easier ways of lighting a fire than a bow drill. And one of the things about learning bow drill is it makes all the stages of fire lighting better. So, you know, even if you practice bow drill and you get into a difficult situation, you wouldn't then use bow drill necessarily if you had a quicker means of lighting a fire. And it's not about cheating, it's about what works. The more you know, the better, but clearly there are multiple different ways of lighting a fire. And if you know it's going to be difficult for you to light fire with a bow drill, you know, there are some people that are much better at it than others, and some people that are much more capable. They're stronger, they're more practiced, they're quicker with their carving, all of those sorts of things. But some people are not so good, and you really need to be realistic about what you're likely to come up against, and what you're likely to be able to achieve in those circumstances, and prepare yourself appropriately. It's all about being prepared, and yes, you want to be able to prepare yourself in as many ways as possible, but don't get fixated on one technique. And this isn't just aimed at Danny, it's aimed at everybody that's listening to this. Aim to have a realistic set of skills that work in the circumstances that you're going to find yourself in. All right, thanks Danny. Where's the next question? Okay, question from Zoltan Zabo. Great name, Zoltan, love it. Hi Paul, first thank you and congrats for all the vids, podcasts and articles. You're very welcome. My question is, what animal track would you suggest for a beginner in tracking? Do you have any advice, and what is your favourite season and place to track? Any favourite animals? Thank you, Zoltan from Hungary. So there's quite a few questions there, and I'll try and be relatively concise. Easiest season, I mean, you're in Hungary, easiest season to learn, to start to learn to track and understand the behaviour of animals through the medium of tracking is in the winter, when there is some snow on the ground and you can read the tracks much more easily. You know, for example, here you may pick up tracks at this time of year in some spots, but other places it would be very difficult to pick up tracks, and it's harder to follow something, and it's harder to pick out exactly what's left it. Whereas in the snow, you've got this perfect medium, like sand, you've got this perfect medium potentially actually that's going to leave a lot of information. You get the wingtips of birds, you get birds landing and taking off, you get full tracks from foxes, you can see where they've been digging, you can see tracks from small animals like weasels and stoats right through to larger animals like, you know, red deer and elk. You can see lynx and foxes and all sorts of lynx and wolves and all sorts of things that you might not necessarily pick up on going through undergrowth normally. So you're going to get a lot more information in a short period of time, and you can really start to understand how animals move, and that can help you in harder seasons. So I would say get out in the winter, in the snow, even with a light dusting of snow, or even just with a hard frost, you're going to pick up a lot more sign of animals having moved through an area than you are it may be in the middle of the summer, in the spring or in the autumn. In terms of particular species, deer are always good for tracking. Deer will leave sign most of the year round. They've got quite hard edges to their hooves, and so they're going to crease things. They're going to leave quite well-defined footprints. They're going to leave them in soft vegetation. They're going to leave it in moss. They're going to leave it in soft earth and sandy soil. So you stand more chance of following them. You stand more chance of identifying them, both in terms of size and sex and species, as well as ascertaining the direction and what they're doing. So you know, if you want to pick on a particular species set, if you like, I would look at deer, and if you want really relatively easy conditions, I would look in the winter, and then just go out and see what you can see as well. Don't necessarily just focus right down, just be open-minded, open your vision, go out, see what you can see. And one of the key things with tracks and tracking and just noticing more in the woods in general is just be inquisitive. If you see something that catches your eye, don't just kind of go, oh yeah, okay, that's something I might look at. Really make the conscious effort to go, oh, there's something a little bit out of the ordinary over there. I'm going to make the effort to go over and have a look at that. That inquisitiveness, it really pays dividends, because you will see a lot more, you'll notice a lot more. We tend to filter a lot of stuff out in our day-to-day lives, and you have to kind of remove that filter, be a little bit more like a child, because we filter stuff out, as I say, and we tend to be very goal-oriented. We tend to be, right, I'm going for a walk from A to B. I'm going for a walk for 2 hours. I'm going for a walk and I'm going to be back for 5 o'clock because that's what time I have to have tea and cake with my wife, or whatever it is. Just go out for a walk. Don't give yourself strict time limits. Feel free to wander. Feel free to change your plan and your itinerary within the bounds of being safe and people knowing where you are, of course. But feel free to wander a bit more like a child. If you watch the way kids move, they don't have a particular goal. They just go out and they look at stuff and they're like, oh, this is interesting, and they stand in puddles and they poke at things with sticks and they go and look at things that were brightly coloured that catch their eye. You have to be a bit more like that, rather than going, right, I'm going from here to there, and on the way I'm going to count as many signs as I see. That's not the way to do it, because you'll just get stressed, and the stressed brain isn't open to what's going on around you. So just be relaxed, go out and see what you can see, follow up, be open to opportunities. You might want to go out and look for fox sign, but you find a really good deer trail, follow it. Just follow what you see. You might not see any fox tracks that day. So that would be my advice, and have fun with it. And there's also a great book by Preben Dahlstrom and Preben Bang called Animal Tracks and Sign. It doesn't teach you how to track, but it does really help with identification of animal tracks and sign in Northern Europe and Eurasia. That's a book that I'd thoroughly recommend. That's my book recommendation for today. I'll put a link to that in the show notes below this video on my blog at paulkirtley.co.uk. All right, next question is from Rick Stratton. Don't know where Rick is, which country he's in, but he asks, well, first off, he says the Ask Paul Kirtley series is great, and I appreciate all the free information you provide to the outdoors community. Well, you're very welcome, Rick, and I hope it's useful to you and it enhances your outdoor life. That's why I do this. And I don't really know of another way that I could get this information out in this way as efficiently. So it seems to work for everybody. I enjoy doing it. It makes me think about what I know and get it across to people in a way that's helpful to them, and it helps a lot of people. So it's very, very good to do it. And his question is, I would like to know whether you practice bushcraft while hunting season is open and what tips you might have to increase safety during these times. Thanks, Rick. Well, I'm going to assume that you're in North America somewhere, Rick, because of that question. Simply because of the preponderance for people to make themselves very visible with orange, blaze orange, for example, whereas in parts, or certainly in the UK and parts of Europe, that isn't necessarily the case. And there's a lot of hunting that goes on in the UK that year round. There are different seasons for different deer, for example, which pretty much, if you join one onto the other, different species and different sexes, pretty much goes year round. So there's hunting of deer pretty much year round in the forests and the hills of the UK. And then you've got different game bird shooting seasons, and that's more with shotguns. And that tends to be up in the hills for grouse and in the forests for pheasant. But in terms of people using high-powered rifles, there is a lot of deer stalking that goes on. People are controlling foxes as well with high-powered rifles, as well as there being some 2-2 shooting of rabbits and smaller game, pigeons and that sort of thing as well. So there's a lot of shooting goes on here. There's a lot of shooting goes on in Scandinavia. I know in Sweden in particular, Germany, there's a lot of hunting goes on there. So these are things that go on all the time. Now, part and parcel of that are land access rules. I think the basic thing you need to do really is obey the rules for access. You've got to remember, if you're trespassing across a piece of woodland that's privately owned that might be stalked by people with firearms, they're not going to try and shoot you. And I can't think of any examples where people have inadvertently been shot, because generally people, certainly in the UK, people who shoot are very, very careful to make sure that what they're shooting at is definitely their prey species. But you know, bullets carry on going for a long while, and you do need to think about where you're going. Here in Scotland, the stag season is just coming to an end, the red stag season, and certainly around this time of year in October, when you walk into areas that are open access under the Scottish Outdoor Access Code, there will be a sign often that says, please could you stick to the trails at this time of year, because the deer are very sensitive. It's an important time of year for stalking for the estates. It's an important time of year for revenue for them and for their guests to go out stalking. And it's also important that you stay within an area that's safe, where people know you are. So it works for everybody, and you should respect that. So my first thing I would say is look into what the local restrictions are at the particular time of year, because they may largely dictate what you can and can't do. And notice I'm not talking specifically about bushcraft here. Bushcraft is something that I carry with me wherever I go. It's skills and knowledge that I carry with me all the time. It's not an activity that I go out to do. I may use my fire lighting skills while I'm on a canoe trip. I may use my natural navigation skills while I'm on a ski tour. I may use my axe skills while on a winter camping trip on snowshoes and toboggan to take down a dead standing tree and cut it up and split it up for the stove. I may use my skinning and butchery skills to take a deer into the component parts and joints for cooking when out on a stalking trip. So these are things that are integrated into my outdoor life. It's not an activity that I go and do, other than when I'm teaching a course where I'm putting a concentrated set of skills in front of people so that they can learn efficiently and effectively in a small period of time. So I'm accelerating their learning for them and giving them the benefit of my experience, both in doing things close to home and doing things in wild and remote places, and bringing that knowledge back to bear and tutoring and showing people efficient ways of doing things, and giving them the benefit of my teaching skills as well, and getting stuff across efficiently to people so that they can go away enabled with those skills to use them in the way that suits their outdoor life. There was a large wasp just came out of the tree stump next to me there, which was quite interesting. But it's just flown off. So I think it was a queen. So my point being is that in terms of going to do bushcraft, it's something that I do all the time outdoors. It's something that I do. But in terms of what I do within particular hunting seasons, I'm going to respect what's going on and other users of the land. And clearly in terms of safety, in areas where people are expected to be wearing some sort of orange during the hunting season, if they're in areas where hunting's going on, and you know, I would be wearing some sort of orange blaze on my rucksack and on my person potentially. You know, you can wear an orange cap. There are some good caps that are green but have a flap that comes up and they're orange on the top. Put a part of an orange survival bag, wrap it around your rucksack so people can see that. That's a good thing to do if you're in areas where people are hunting in a concentrated way over a short period of time. So I'm thinking particularly moose hunting season or elk hunting season. People go a little bit crazy for that sort of thing, and in some parts of the world I wouldn't be in the woods where people are really going crazy for moose hunting, because a lot of hunters end up being shot by other hunters because of over exuberance. I don't want to be a hiker in the middle of that. I'll go somewhere else if I can, or just choose to you know, in those short hunting seasons you know, that may only last a week or two, I'll just stay out of the woods for that period of time. But more generally, just respect what's going on, look into what the local people expect from people that are in the woods, and stick to those traditions and stick to those expectations. All right, next question. Getting through these quite quickly today, and I think this is the last one. Got through more than 5 today, which is excellent. This is the last one from Andy, and Andy asks about powerless refrigeration. Hi Paul, do you have any tips or tricks for how to keep things cold, meat, etc., when camping for extended periods in the wild? In the absence of any good natural methods, are there any particular bits of kit you would recommend? Many thanks, Andy. So yeah, refrigeration is an issue, and you can clearly see why people smoked meat in the past to preserve it, and I think that's still something that you might want to consider in terms of what you take with you in the first place. If you want to take meat for extended periods of time, I'd be looking at smoked meat. I'd be looking at making your own jerky or biltong. The modern dehydration units that you can get are very good for dehydrating foods and making them last a lot longer. So when we do longer trips in the winter, one of my friends, Ian, tends to get a roe deer from a stalker that he knows, and he will make a lot of venison jerky, which is flavoured in various different ways, and we bag that up and take it with us, and that can be eaten on its own, that can be added into other things. So that's a way of taking meat for longer. In the winter, clearly you can buy meat and just leave it out at the ambient temperature and it will stay pretty cold, but in the summer clearly it's an issue where things will become rancid or have bacteria growing on them and in them in a relatively short period of time. You need to be particularly careful. So I would say if you've got raw meat for any length of time, you need to be cooking it extremely well. So look at boiling things, you know, sort of stewing meats rather than just searing them, to make sure they're thoroughly well cooked. And that particularly towards the end of having them out for a long period of time. Look at vacuum packing things. So if you're taking bacon, for example, which, you know, should last a reasonable length of time because it's salted, but once it's sliced and it's been handled a bit, there's always more chance of having bacteria on it. So if you vacuum pack bacon into smaller packs for each day, that's going to last you longer. That's something we do in Canada when we do canoe trips, so that's going to last longer, and it keeps it contained. It stops it leaking on other things. You can dispose of the packaging, particularly if you're traveling in bear country. You can burn the plastic that's got the blood and the grease on it so that you're not carrying stuff that might be attractive to animals. In terms of keeping other things cold, the old trick of a wet muslin bag is a good one, because the evaporation will take a lot of heat away, and evaporative heat loss is very effective. It's a very effective means of losing heat. It's why we sweat. It's why we can deal with hot temperatures very effectively. It's also why getting wet in cold conditions and wet and cold and windy conditions is particularly dangerous for us, because we can lose a lot of heat and end up with our core body temperature being very, very low. You can use that knowledge to keep things cold. If you've got them in a waterproof container, you can store things in streams. That's a good way of keeping things cool. You can cool your beers that way as well, but equally you can keep some food cold that way. But a wet muslin bag around things with a bit of air on it to create some evaporative heat loss is a good way of keeping things cool. Keeping things out of the direct sunlight is important. Tents can get very hot in sunny weather, and so not necessarily, you might think, well, a tent's relatively shady on the inside, but if it's got the sun on the outside, it's going to get very warm on the inside, and that's going to start, almost being like a little oven starting to cook food. One of the things that we use on courses when we're camped out for long periods of time is we just use cool boxes or eskies, if you want to call them that way, and the better quality those boxes, the longer you're going to keep things cold for. And if you can be organized so that you're not opening and closing one that you don't need to, then you're going to keep that cold air in there. So maybe have one box that's going to have all the food that you need in it for a certain number of days, and have another box that's not going to be opened until you've finished that first box. And you might even pack some ice in that, and that ice will melt over time, but that's going to help keep things cold. And so that's going to allow you to keep fresh food for longer. Even if you're in a vehicle-based trip, you can do that. And clearly, if you're doing a serious vehicle-based trip, you might look at getting a dual battery system and getting a second fridge, a fridge in the back, running off that dual battery system the whole time. Particularly if you're traveling in hot countries, you're traveling in Africa, or traveling, it's a fairly standard thing for people to do in Australia. Have a fridge in the back of the 4x4 and have a dual battery system on the vehicle, so you're not running the main battery down by running the fridge. That's something you can do as well. So it depends on where you're going, how long you're going for. There are some simple tricks with evaporation you can use, keeping it out of the sunlight, being organized, preserving some food before you go, preparing food, dehydrating it is another good way of extending having the same type of food but for longer. And then if you're going for a lot longer, then I'd be looking at getting some more specialist, certainly getting some high quality cool boxes or eskies, and then move on to maybe, if you're doing a vehicle based trip, getting a fridge on a dual battery system in the back of the vehicle. And that's my general advice. So hopefully that's useful to you, Andy. Thanks for the questions. That brings us to the end of episode 13 of Ask Paul Kirtley. I did think about leaving this until Halloween in terms of putting it out, but I thought people seem to be enjoying the fact that these are coming out every week, and it'd be a bit unfair, just for the sake of having something out on Halloween, to wait an extra week to put it out. So thanks for your subscription to these if you're watching on YouTube. Thanks for listening if you're listening on SoundCloud or elsewhere to the podcast, and thanks for watching if you're watching this on my blog. Please leave a comment and let me know what you think. I'm not getting any questions on Instagram or Twitter at the moment. Please keep them coming. Keep them nice and short. They're really good. I know I've got a couple to answer on Instagram, but I've not seen any come in for a number of weeks. That seems to have died right off. Keep the SpeakPipe questions coming. And please share this video wherever you're watching this. The link that's at the top of the page where you're watching this, please share it with relevant communities, whether it's a forum, whether it's a page on Facebook, so that other people can get the benefit of this series as well. I'm getting loads of compliments about this. People are really enjoying this format and really enjoying getting the answers to their questions. So if you could share this with other like-minded people, that would really help me out, and it will help you out as well, because I'll get more questions, and hopefully they're relevant questions for you as well if you're sharing with like-minded people, and that means that you get more information out of me as well. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you on the next episode. Take care. Bye.